The Solomon Islands, 1942. In the suffocating humidity where jungle canopy blocked out the sun and visibility rarely exceeded 20 yards, United States Marines introduced a weapon into combat that would shatter every tactical assumption the Imperial Japanese Army had carefully constructed over decades of military planning. The Winchester Model 1897 pump-action shotgun, a weapon Japanese military strategists had dismissed as nothing more than a farmer's tool for hunting waterfowl, was about to rewrite the rules of close-quarters jungle warfare in ways that would echo through military history for generations to come. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Pacific theater of World War II presented combat conditions unlike anything military planners in Washington or Tokyo had anticipated. The island chains stretching across the vast Pacific Ocean, from the Solomons to the Philippines, from New Guinea to the Marianas, were not the open battlefields of European warfare where armies maneuvered in formation across rolling countryside. Instead, these were claustrophobic green hells where triple canopy jungle created perpetual twilight at ground level, where the air hung thick with moisture that rotted equipment and sapped human endurance, and where the distance between life and death could be measured in feet rather than yards. The tactical reality of Pacific Island combat defied conventional military doctrine. In the jungles of Guadalcanal, Bougainville, and New Britain, engagements typically occurred at ranges of 15 to 30 yards, distances where a soldier often heard his enemy before seeing him, where the crack of a breaking twig could mean the difference between ambusher and ambushed. Traditional rifle marksmanship, the foundation of infantry training since the 19th century, became almost irrelevant in vegetation so dense that aimed fire at distant targets was simply impossible. What mattered in the Green Labyrinth was immediate, devastating firepower at point-blank range, the ability to put overwhelming force on target in the split second between detection and contact. The jungle environment created unique tactical challenges that transformed every assumption about infantry combat. Visibility limitations meant that elaborate flanking maneuvers were nearly impossible to coordinate. The oppressive heat and humidity, regularly exceeding 95 degrees Fahrenheit with near total saturation, exhausted soldiers within hours. The terrain itself became an enemy. Razor-sharp kunai grass that sliced through uniforms and skin, sucking mud that swallowed boots and equipment, and an endless variety of venomous creatures that turned every rest stop into a calculated risk. In this nightmarish environment, conventional tactics developed on European training grounds proved worse than useless. They were actively dangerous. The Imperial Japanese Army entered World War II with a highly refined tactical doctrine built on decades of combat experience and deliberate strategic calculation. Japanese military theorists had studied Western military methods extensively, analyzing British tactics in colonial campaigns, French innovations in the Great War, and German combined arms doctrine. What emerged was a distinctive Japanese approach to warfare that emphasized spirit, initiative, and aggressive close-quarters combat as force multipliers that could overcome material disadvantage. At the heart of Japanese tactical thinking was the concept of seishin, spiritual power or fighting spirit, that military leaders believed could triumph over mere mechanical superiority. This wasn't simply propaganda or mystical thinking, though Western observers often dismissed it as such. Instead, it represented a calculated strategic response to industrial reality. Japan's steel production in 1941 totaled approximately 7 million tons annually, less than what American steel mills produced in a single month. Faced with this staggering material disadvantage, Japanese military doctrine had to find advantages elsewhere. The solution was to make each individual Japanese soldier superior in the one domain where industrial production couldn't easily compensate: close combat, where training, discipline, and willingness to accept casualties would prove decisive. The tactical expression of this philosophy was the night infiltration attack followed by close-quarters annihilation. Japanese infantry units trained relentlessly in these techniques, practicing silent movement through difficult terrain, coordinated small unit actions in darkness, and aggressive bayonet fighting at arm's length. The standard tactical sequence was methodical and proven. Approach enemy positions under cover of darkness using terrain and vegetation for concealment. Infiltrate defensive perimeters by exploiting gaps and weak points, then overwhelm defenders at close range, where Japanese superiority in hand-to-hand combat would prove decisive. This approach had worked devastatingly well against Chinese forces in Manchuria and China proper, against British Commonwealth troops in Malaya, and against American defenders in the Philippines. Japanese soldiers trained extensively with the Type 38 Arisaka rifle and its mounted bayonet, a combination that totaled nearly 6 feet in length. Bayonet drill occupied countless hours of training time, with instructors emphasizing aggressive forward movement, the willingness to close with the enemy regardless of casualties, and the psychological shock effect of a screaming bayonet charge emerging from darkness. Japanese tactical manuals assumed that once infantry closed to hand-to-hand range, Western soldiers, presumed soft from industrial comfort, would break and flee. This assumption wasn't mere prejudice. It was based on successful combat experience across multiple theaters where Japanese close assault tactics had indeed shattered enemy formations. Into this tactical environment, the United States Marine Corps introduced a weapon that seemed, on first consideration, almost absurdly unsuited for modern military combat: the Winchester Model 1897 pump-action shotgun. A weapon Japanese military strategists had dismissed as nothing more than a farmer's tool for hunting waterfowl, was about to rewrite the rules of close-quarters jungle warfare in ways that would echo through military history for generations to come. Yet the Model 1897 possessed characteristics that made it uniquely suited to the close-range chaos of Pacific jungle combat. The weapon's most distinctive feature was its external hammer and lack of a trigger disconnector, a mechanical detail that created what shooters called slam fire capability. A trained operator could hold the trigger back while rapidly cycling the pump action, firing as fast as he could work the forend. In the hands of a skilled Marine, this translated to 6 rounds of buckshot downrange and approximately 2 seconds. A rate of fire that exceeded many contemporary submachine guns. More importantly, each of those 6 rounds contained 9.33 caliber lead pellets, meaning a single magazine's worth of ammunition put 54 projectiles into the air, creating a wall of lead that was nearly impossible to evade at close range. The Winchester Model 1912, developed by Winchester engineer Thomas Crossley Johnson, represented an evolutionary improvement on Browning's original design. The Model 12 featured an internal hammer mechanism that prevented accidental discharge if the weapon was dropped, a critical safety feature in the chaos of jungle combat where falls and collisions were constant hazards. The internal hammer design also provided a smoother, more reliable action that was less prone to jamming when caked with mud, sand, or the omnipresent coral dust of Pacific atolls. By 1943, the Model 12 had largely supplanted the Model 97 in Marine Corps armories, though both weapons continued serving throughout the Pacific campaign. The military versions of these shotguns featured specific modifications for combat use. A 20-inch barrel replaced the longer sporting barrels, providing better maneuverability in tight quarters while maintaining adequate shot pattern at the close ranges typical of jungle fighting. A ventilated heat shield covered the barrel, protecting the operator's hand from burns during rapid fire, a critical feature when slam firing multiple rounds in quick succession. Perhaps most striking was the addition of a bayonet lug, allowing attachment of the M1917 sword bayonet. This 17-inch blade transformed an already formidable close-quarters weapon into something truly terrifying. A shotgun that could blast an enemy at 10 yards or skewer him at arm's length. The effectiveness of any firearm ultimately depends on its ammunition, and the shells these military shotguns fired were as important as the weapons themselves. Standard military 12-gauge ammunition came in 2 primary loadings, double-aught buckshot and triple-aught buckshot. The double-aught load contained 9 lead pellets, each measuring 0.33 inches in diameter and weighing approximately 53.8 grains, roughly equivalent to a .32 caliber pistol bullet. The triple-aught load held slightly fewer pellets, typically 8, but each was larger at 0.36 inches in diameter. Both loadings were designed for maximum incapacitation at close range, with each pellet carrying sufficient energy to cause serious wounds. The ballistic characteristics of buckshot made it ideally suited to jungle combat's unique demands. At 10 yards, the 9 pellets from a double-aught buckshot load would create a pattern approximately 10 inches in diameter, small enough to concentrate on a man-sized target, but large enough to compensate for the difficulty of precise aiming in chaotic close-quarters encounters. At 20 yards, the pattern expanded to roughly 20 inches, still tight enough for effective use, but now covering an area large enough to engage multiple targets in a group. At 30 yards, the maximum visibility in most Pacific jungle environments, the pattern spread to approximately 30 inches, creating what amounted to an area effect weapon that could suppress multiple enemy positions simultaneously. This spreading pattern represented a fundamental advantage in the tactical conditions of Pacific combat. Traditional rifle fire required precise aim at a specific target, difficult enough on a known distance range, exponentially harder when that target was a camouflaged enemy soldier glimpsed momentarily through dense vegetation. A rifleman who missed by 6 inches at 20 yards simply missed. His bullet passed harmlessly past the target. A shotgunner who missed by 6 inches at that same range still put multiple pellets on target, because the spreading pattern compensated for imperfect aim. In the split-second encounters typical of jungle patrol, this margin for error could mean the difference between killing an enemy ambusher and dying in the opening seconds of contact. The sheer number of projectiles also created psychological effects that transcended mere ballistic effectiveness. A soldier who survived being shot at with a rifle, a single bullet that missed or inflicted a non-lethal wound, might maintain combat effectiveness and continue fighting. A soldier hit by even a partial buckshot pattern, with multiple pellets striking simultaneously across his torso, experienced massive trauma and shock that typically ended his participation in the fight immediately. Survivors of shotgun encounters described the experience as being hit by multiple opponents simultaneously. The impact of 4 or 5 heavy pellets arriving in the same instant created physical and psychological shock that exceeded the effect of a single rifle bullet, even if the total tissue damage was comparable. American industrial capacity during World War II represented perhaps the single greatest strategic advantage the Allied powers possessed: the ability to design, manufacture, and distribute war materials in quantities that dwarfed Axis production would ultimately prove decisive across every theater of the global conflict. Shotgun production illustrated this industrial dominance in microcosm. The United States could afford to manufacture specialized weapons for niche tactical roles while simultaneously producing rifles, machine guns, artillery pieces, vehicles, aircraft, and ships in numbers that Axis powers could barely comprehend.
Winchester Repeating Arms Company, based in New Haven, Connecticut, served as the primary contractor for military shotguns. Company records indicate production of approximately 25,000 Model 1897 shotguns for military contracts, with the majority manufactured in the early war years between 1941 and 1943. Model 1912 production dwarfed the older design, with between 60,000 and 80,000 units manufactured specifically for military use between 1941 and 1945. These numbers represented only Winchester's contribution. Other manufacturers, including Remington Arms, Ithaca Gun Company, and Stevens Arms, also produced military shotguns under government contract, though in smaller quantities. The distribution of these weapons followed the United States Marine Corps' Table of Organization E-100, formalized in 1943 after early Pacific combat experience informed tactical doctrine development. This organizational structure authorized 306 shotguns per Marine division, a force typically comprising approximately 19,000 men at full strength. This allocation represented careful calculation of tactical needs, enough shotguns to provide specialized capabilities where needed, but not so many that they displaced the rifles, machine guns, and mortars that formed the backbone of infantry firepower. The shotguns were distributed primarily to specific units where their characteristics offered particular advantages: military police companies for guard and prisoner handling duties, pioneer battalions conducting patrols in confined terrain, and selected rifle squads assigned to point security during movement through dense vegetation. Beyond frontline combat units, shotguns served in numerous auxiliary roles that consumed significant portions of total production. Naval vessels carried shotguns for boarding operations and security details. Air bases employed them for perimeter defense and military police duties. Training facilities required shotguns for familiarization courses and qualification exercises. Prisoner of war camps used them for guard towers and escort details. These necessary but non-combat applications meant that while America produced tens of thousands of military shotguns, only a fraction saw direct combat employment against enemy forces. The industrial capacity existed to arm every Marine with a shotgun if desired, but tactical reality dictated more measured distribution. The United States Marine Corps approached shotgun employment with characteristic thoroughness, developing comprehensive training programs to ensure Marines could effectively employ these specialized weapons in combat conditions. The foundation for this training was Technical Manual TM9-285, 12-gauge shotguns, published on September 21, 1942 by the War Department. This detailed manual covered operation, maintenance, and tactical employment of the Winchester Models 9-7 and 12, as well as other shotguns in military service, including the Remington Model 11, Stevens Models 520 and 620, and Ithaca Model 37. Training occurred at the Marine Corps' primary training facilities: Camp Pendleton in California, with its vast expanses of chaparral and canyon terrain that could simulate Pacific jungle conditions; Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, where extensive woodlands and swampy lowlands provided realistic training environments; and the legendary Parris Island in South Carolina, where countless Marines received their initial combat training. Shotgun instruction emphasized specific combat applications rather than general marksmanship. Marines learned point security techniques, how to serve as lead scout for a patrol, maintaining constant vigilance while moving through vegetation where the enemy might be feet away. They practiced rapid engagement drills, developing muscle memory to bring the weapon to shoulder and fire in the fraction of a second available during chance encounters with enemy infiltrators. The Model 97's unique slam fire capability received special attention in training curricula. Instructors demonstrated the technique: pull the trigger and hold it back, then work the pump action as rapidly as possible, firing with each forward stroke. In skilled hands, this technique allowed a Marine to empty the weapon's 6-round capacity in less than 2 seconds, devastating firepower that could sweep an entire enemy squad off their feet before they could react. However, instructors also cautioned against over-reliance on slam fire. The technique consumed ammunition at terrifying rates. A Marine's basic load of 36 shells could be expended in 12 seconds of continuous firing. Additionally, rapid fire heated the barrel to temperatures that could cause painful burns even through the heat shield, and sustained slam fire increased the risk of mechanical failure in the weapon's action. Night defense tactics formed another crucial component of shotgun training. Marines learned to position themselves at likely infiltration points along defensive perimeters, gaps between positions, creek beds, and trails that offered concealed approaches. The shotgun spreading pattern compensated for the near impossible task of precise aiming in total darkness, allowing defenders to engage infiltrators glimpsed momentarily in starlight or revealed briefly by illumination flares. Instructors emphasized the importance of controlled, deliberate fire rather than panic shooting. The Marine with 6 rounds in his shotgun needed to make each shot count, as reloading under stress and darkness while enemy soldiers attempted to overrun the position was a recipe for disaster. Cave and bunker clearing procedures represented perhaps the most demanding shotgun application. Marines learned to approach fortified positions under covering fire from supporting elements, then enter with shotgun at the ready. The weapon's devastating close-range effect made it ideal for the confined spaces of Japanese defensive works, where a single blast could incapacitate multiple defenders. However, clearing operations demanded perfect coordination between shotgunner and support team. Entering a bunker meant exposing yourself to point-blank enemy fire, and once committed, there was no retreat. Training emphasized aggressive forward movement, immediate target engagement, and seamless transition to follow-on forces who would secure the position while the lead element moved to the next objective. The tactical mathematics of shotgun employment in Pacific jungle warfare appeared overwhelmingly favorable. Consider the standard engagement scenario. A Marine rifle squad conducting patrol operations through dense jungle suddenly encounters a Japanese infantry section at a range of 15 yards. The visibility is poor, with vegetation obscuring clear sight lines. Both sides have perhaps 2 seconds to react before the encounter turns into a point-blank firefight where every second of delay means casualties.
In this scenario, the Marine point man, armed with a Winchester Model 97, possessed dramatic advantages over his Japanese counterpart with an Arisaka rifle. The Japanese rifleman had to acquire a specific target through the vegetation, align his sights despite poor light and visual obstructions, and fire a single bullet that had to hit a vital area to immediately incapacitate the enemy. Miss by 6 inches and the shot was wasted, giving the enemy time to return fire. The Marine shotgunner faced no such constraints. Bringing the weapon roughly on target and pulling the trigger released 9 heavy pellets in a spreading pattern that compensated for imperfect aim, obscured visibility, and target movement. The buckshot load didn't need to hit perfectly. Any pellet strike would likely wound, and multiple pellet strikes would almost certainly incapacitate. The mathematics became even more favorable when considering follow-up shots. The Japanese rifleman, with his bolt-action Arisaka, needed approximately 2 seconds to work the bolt, chamber a fresh round, reacquire his target, and fire again. The Marine, with his pump-action shotgun, needed perhaps half a second to cycle the action and fire, 4 times faster. Using slam-fire technique, the Marine could put 6 devastating loads downrange while the Japanese soldier was still working the bolt for his 3rd shot. This rate of fire advantage translated directly into battlefield dominance at close range. The spreading pattern also provided a critical advantage when facing multiple enemies. A rifleman confronting 3 Japanese soldiers had to prioritize targets, engage them sequentially, and accept that he would likely take enemy fire before neutralizing all threats. The shotgunner could engage all 3 targets nearly simultaneously. The spreading buckshot pattern at 20 yards measured approximately 20 inches, easily covering multiple men if they were clustered together. A single well-placed shot might wound or kill multiple enemies, and rapid follow-up fire could suppress the survivors before they effectively returned fire. Night combat scenarios amplified these advantages even further. Japanese tactical doctrine emphasized night infiltration attacks specifically because darkness negated American advantages in firepower and technology. A soldier who couldn't see his enemy couldn't shoot him, and close-quarters combat in darkness favored the side with superior hand-to-hand combat training, the Japanese. Shotguns partially countered this Japanese advantage. The spreading buckshot pattern meant that aimed fire, while still important, wasn't as critical as with rifles. A defender who detected movement at close range could fire toward the threat with reasonable confidence that the pattern spread would score hits even if perfect aim was impossible in darkness. The distinctive sound of a pump-action shotgun being cycled, a mechanical sound easily recognized and impossible to mistake, also served as an effective deterrent, warning infiltrators that defenders were alert and positioned to respond. Based on these theoretical advantages, military planners anticipated that shotguns would revolutionize close-quarters jungle warfare. The weapons seemed perfectly designed for Pacific conditions, devastating at the close ranges where most combat occurred, capable of rapid fire that could sweep away multiple enemies, effective even when precise aiming was difficult or impossible, and psychologically intimidating in a way that conventional weapons were not. Early combat reports from the Guadalcanal campaign seemed to confirm these expectations. Marines carrying shotguns on patrol operations reported confidence in the weapon's effectiveness. The ability to engage immediately upon contact without needing to acquire precise sight picture or compensate for range estimation meant faster reaction times and more decisive initial contact. Patrols armed with shotguns could move more aggressively through contested terrain, knowing that if ambushed, they possessed the firepower to instantly suppress the ambush and gain initiative. Defensive positions improved their security with shotgun-armed Marines positioned at critical points. The weapon's effectiveness in darkness meant that infiltrators faced immediate, devastating fire from defenders who could engage without perfect target identification. Japanese tactical doctrine assumed that close-range combat would favor their superior training and willingness to accept casualties, but shotguns threatened to invalidate this assumption by allowing defenders to inflict catastrophic casualties in the opening seconds of contact, before Japanese advantages in hand-to-hand combat could come into play. The psychological impact exceeded the physical effects. Japanese soldiers encountering shotgun fire for the first time faced a weapon entirely outside their tactical frame of reference. Military training had prepared them for rifle fire, machine gun fire, mortar and artillery bombardment, even flamethrowers. But shotguns, weapons they associated with bird hunting rather than military combat, represented something unexpected and terrifying. The visual effect of a buckshot pattern hitting a human being differed dramatically from rifle wounds. Multiple simultaneous impacts, widespread trauma across the torso, and the distinctive scatter pattern of pellet wounds created injuries that were unmistakably different from anything Japanese soldiers had encountered. This psychological shock, combined with the physical devastation, promised to break Japanese willingness to press close-quarters attacks. Military leadership anticipated that widespread shotgun deployment would force Japanese tactical adaptation. If American defenders could inflict catastrophic casualties on Japanese infiltration attempts, Japanese commanders would need to abandon their preferred doctrine and fight at longer ranges, where American advantages in firepower, artillery support, and material resources would prove even more decisive. The shotgun, properly employed, threatened to deny Japanese forces the close-quarters combat they had trained for and relied on to compensate for material disadvantage. It was the perfect counter to Japanese tactical doctrine, a weapon that transformed American perceived weakness in hand-to-hand combat into irrelevance by ensuring that hand-to-hand combat never occurred. American industrial capacity ensured adequate supplies would reach every combat unit that needed them. Training programs prepared thousands of Marines to employ shotguns effectively in jungle conditions. Tactical doctrine had been developed and refined to maximize the weapon's advantages while minimizing its limitations. Authorization tables allocated shotguns to specific units where their characteristics offered maximum benefit. Everything was in place for shotguns to prove decisively effective in Pacific jungle warfare.
The stage was set. American forces prepared to demonstrate that specialized weapons, properly employed, could counter Japanese tactical advantages and inflict disproportionate casualties in close-range encounters. The Winchester Model 1897 and Model 1912 were about to prove themselves in the most demanding combat environment imaginable, or so everyone believed. What actually happened when American shotguns met Japanese infantry in the green hell of the Pacific Islands would prove far more complex, far more problematic, and far less decisive than these promising theoretical advantages suggested. The gap between what should have worked and what actually occurred in combat would reveal uncomfortable truths about the relationship between military theory and battlefield reality. In this narrow sense, the popular narrative contains truth. Japanese forces were unprepared for American shotguns because their military culture simply didn't conceptualize such weapons as legitimate tools of warfare. However, this unpreparedness proved largely irrelevant to actual combat outcomes. The weapons weren't devastating because Japanese soldiers didn't expect them. Japanese soldiers didn't particularly fear or respect them because they rarely encountered them in ways that significantly impacted battles. The surprise was real, but the tactical consequences were minimal. Being unprepared for a weapon that plays only peripheral roles in combat doesn't constitute a critical vulnerability. It represents accurate prioritization of threats and appropriate allocation of training and doctrinal attention. The verified historical record reveals a reality far more prosaic than the dramatic mythology. Shotguns were present in Marine units throughout the Pacific Campaign, manufactured in substantial quantities by American industry and issued according to official tables of organization. Marines received training in their employment and carried them in various tactical situations. These facts are indisputable and well documented. However, presence, authorization, and training don't automatically translate to significant combat impact. The gap between theoretical capability and practical utility proved vast when tropical humidity rendered ammunition unreliable, when tactical evolution pushed engagement ranges beyond effective shotgun distance, and when logistical constraints limited ammunition availability. For nearly 3 years of Pacific combat, from Guadalcanal through Iwo Jima, paper-hauled shotgun ammunition swelled in tropical humidity, making reliable weapon function impossible. This fundamental practical limitation meant that regardless of shotguns' theoretical advantages, they couldn't deliver consistent performance when needed. A weapon that might not fire when the trigger was pulled naturally saw reduced employment, and unreliable weapons left correspondingly little impression on the combat record. The brass ammunition that finally solved this problem arrived in March 1945, too late to impact the decisive battles that had already determined the war's outcome. Even when functioning properly with reliable ammunition, shotguns filled primarily specialized auxiliary roles rather than serving as primary combat weapons. Military police employed them for prisoner escort and compound security. Guard posts received them for perimeter defense. Patrols occasionally placed them in point positions. These were legitimate and necessary functions, but they represented niche applications rather than the decisive combat impact that theoretical analysis had suggested. The weapons that actually determined battle outcomes, artillery delivering devastating bombardments, naval gunfire reducing fortifications, machine guns providing sustained suppressive fire, flamethrowers clearing bunkers, and mortars supporting infantry advances, received proportional attention in combat reports, veteran accounts, and historical documentation. The statistical void surrounding shotgun employment speaks volumes about their actual battlefield role. World War II generated unprecedented quantities of military data, with detailed records tracking ammunition expenditure, casualty correlations, and weapon effectiveness. Yet no reliable statistics exist correlating shotgun use with enemy casualties or tactical outcomes. Shotguns apparently fell below the threshold necessary for statistical analysis, not because of documentary oversights or lost records, but because their combat employment remained too limited to generate meaningful data. The weapons that actually mattered produced abundant statistics because they were used extensively in combat. Shotguns' absence from statistical documentation accurately reflected their peripheral role. Japanese military responses provide the most compelling evidence of shotguns' limited impact. When American weapons achieved significant tactical effectiveness, Japanese forces recognized this reality and adapted accordingly. Detailed Japanese documentation exists about countering artillery, naval gunfire, machine guns, and especially flamethrowers. The absence of comparable shotgun documentation indicates that Japanese military analysts correctly assessed these weapons as peripheral rather than decisive. If shotguns had achieved the devastating effectiveness that mythology suggests, Japanese forces would have developed countermeasures just as they did for weapons that actually threatened their defensive capabilities. Their lack of concern represented accurate strategic assessment, not cultural blindness or tactical oversight. The transformation of limited historical reality into extensive popular mythology illustrates how military history evolves into cultural narrative. Shotguns possessed inherent dramatic appeal, distinctive appearance, devastating close-range effects, and associations with American frontier pragmatism. Post-war films featured them prominently in combat sequences, creating lasting visual impressions. Video games gave millions of players personal experiences with virtual shotgun combat. Popular histories repeated the mythology uncritically, each retelling reinforcing public perception regardless of documentary evidence. The mythology served cultural needs for compelling narratives about American military innovation and effectiveness, even though historical reality proved far more mundane. The story of Japanese forces encountering American shotguns in World War II ultimately reveals more about the complex relationship between military capability and combat effectiveness than any particular weapon's characteristics. Technical excellence doesn't automatically translate to battlefield dominance. Weapons must integrate into doctrine, logistics, and training to achieve combat effectiveness, and they must function reliably in actual operating conditions. Shotguns possessed theoretical advantages that impressed observers and suggested devastating potential. But practical limitations, ammunition problems, tactical constraints, and logistical realities prevented them from achieving the impact that analysis predicted. American industrial capacity demonstrated its ability to manufacture specialized weapons for niche tactical roles while simultaneously producing conventional weapons in overwhelming quantities. This industrial achievement was real and significant, representing advantages that Axis powers couldn't match. However, the ability to manufacture weapons exceeded the ability to employ them effectively in Pacific conditions, illustrating that industrial might alone doesn't guarantee tactical advantage without supporting systems that enable actual combat effectiveness.
The Japanese infantry, who never expected 12-gauge American shotguns in the assault, were indeed surprised by weapons outside their tactical frame of reference. But this surprise proved tactically irrelevant, because the weapons that actually defeated Japanese forces in the Pacific, overwhelming industrial production creating material superiority, logistical excellence, maintaining supply lines across vast ocean distances, naval power dominating the Pacific and enabling amphibious operations, coordinated combined arms tactics, integrating infantry with artillery and air support, and the relentless application of firepower that Japanese forces couldn't match, operated at scales and intensities far beyond what individual weapons could influence. The shotgun story, properly understood, illustrates not American tactical innovation through unexpected weapons, but rather the complex reality that military effectiveness emerges from integrated systems rather than individual components. Weapons are tools whose utility depends on ammunition reliability, logistical support, tactical doctrine, training quality, and appropriate employment in situations matching their capabilities. When any of these elements fails, even theoretically superior weapons achieve limited practical impact. The verified history of shotgun employment in the Pacific theater demonstrates this fundamental truth. Presence doesn't equal effectiveness. Authorization doesn't equal employment, and theoretical advantage doesn't guarantee practical results. The weapons that actually won the Pacific War, the rifles, machine guns, mortars, artillery pieces, naval guns, and flamethrowers that dominated combat documentation, filled veterans' memories, and prompted Japanese tactical adaptation, achieved their effects through reliable function, appropriate employment, and integration into combined arms systems that multiplied their individual effectiveness. Shotguns remained on the periphery not because they were poorly designed or because Marines didn't know how to use them, but because practical realities prevented them from achieving the combat impact that theoretical analysis had suggested was possible. This is the true history, less dramatic than mythology, more complex than simple narratives allow, but ultimately more instructive about how military effectiveness actually emerges in combat. The Japanese soldiers who never expected American shotguns were right to be surprised by their presence, but wrong to fear their impact beyond the immediate tactical level. The Pacific War was won not through specialized weapons that exploited enemy unpreparedness, but through systematic application of industrial, logistical, and tactical superiority that no amount of Japanese adaptation could counter. The shotgun story, within this larger narrative, serves as a reminder that even the most theoretically promising innovations may achieve only limited practical impact when confronted with the harsh realities of actual combat conditions.